morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to the Navy series with another Arkan's Armies. Today, talking about Chaos Escorts and Cruisers. We will also be covering Loyalist Marines in this video, so let's get right into it. What are Chaos or Marine Escorts, and what do they do? This will be a pretty ubiquitous image throughout this series, so stick with it. Rangers, Raiders, Scouts. So, three main jobs do the Chaos Escort have. The first one is to be a Ranger. A Ranger, in terms of naval warfare, is really designed to be a combat element ahead of the standard patrol. Because, of course, we can't expect a warband or any Chaos Force to really operate like the Imperial Navy. They don't necessarily need to be guarding anything or guiding anyone. They're not necessarily going around with large numbers of merchantmen in tow, of course. So, Rangers are really this initial push. They are a combat patrol force that goes ahead of something considerably more dangerous. Raiders are the next one, and of course this comes along with Ranger, but Raider is very specific, and it's related to the quote, "We fight, we reave, we conquer." Raiders are specifically designed, and generally specifically equipped and augmented, to take on Imperial orbital defenses and to invade planets, or stations, or various other things, including Imperial shipping. The Raider, unlike the Ranger, is looking to get into a fight. The Raider is most specifically designed to take on other ships of a similar class, aka escorts, armed merchantmen, unarmed merchantmen, and planets that don't have significant orbital defenses. Now, I have talked before about Imperial orbital defenses, but what does it mean when I say that some planets don't have a lot of them? Well, some planets are not all that important, quite frankly, and they do not have lots of structures, support equipment, or infrastructure that could really support orbital defenses in the way that we might think with a hive world. A hive could accommodate a half dozen macro cannons simply built into its structure aimed upward. But a random feudal or feral world simply isn't going to have the capacity for that. They won't have the technology to make them, and they won't have the technology to maintain them. And of course, the Imperium has to worry. What is the point? If this planet is going to fall so easily, or it provides so little to the Imperium, why would we squander the resources to defend it with that type of heavy planet-side defenses? Why not just put something like a couple of system ships in orbit, and that's the orbital defense that we're talking about. Quite often these orbital, suborbital kind of floating around the planet defenders are the goal of raiders to overcome. Two genuine Chaos Escorts can probably deal with something like a naval monitor and a pair of system ships without much difficulty. And of course, while they are dangerous to individual pirates, those orbital defenders are pretty much nothing compared to a genuine Chaos raiding force. And then finally, of course, the most classic one, the one that is a one-to-one with the Imperial Navy, Scouts. They act as light, fast-moving scout aircraft, or scout vessels, for much heavier Chaos shipping. Are escorts all we have? Because, of course, this is a pretty big video, and, the Imperium has a ton of escorts. Are escorts all that Chaos has? Well, it depends. Most warbands will have at minimum an escort class vessel, and that's very small warbands that may have no Astartes or only a handful of Astartes. Less than 25, for example, they might be confined to having only an escort and maybe an armed merchantman or a couple of escorts. But of course there are other things within the fleet. The most natural one, and the one that is implied by most fleets, is the train, the logistics train of Chaos forces. Now, of course, the logistics train is not nearly as robust as the Imperial logistics train, but the idea with Chaos logistics is that it is essentially a freighter ship that we have stolen, and we have emptied out in order to put a bunch of supplies, ammunition, and extra equipment in case we need to resupply one of our larger combat vessels. So, Escorts aren't the only thing we have, but there are some warbands that are limited to using escorts as their main force. And like I talked about in the merchantman video, often pirates and chaos forces will rely on their escorts to gather other armed ships. To capture ships that are in dock on weaker planets, or perhaps to grab merchantmen or armed merchantmen off of the space lanes, capture them, turn them to the side of chaos, and increase the fleet in that way. It would not be unreasonable for that reason for then a group of, say, 2 escorts and 5 armed merchantmen to go and attack a light cruiser and another escort and try and take over the light cruiser and increase their naval forces in that way. But there are other ways that we'll talk about later. Why are there so few designs for escorts compared with the Imperials? And you will see that compared to the Imperials, who have 8+ escorts and light cruisers, Chaos tends to have only a few actual types of escorts that they use, and then they have considerably more cruisers. Why is that? Well, the main reason is that Chaos has a very easy time seizing enemy escorts. Why? Well, because a lot of their escorts are designed to be very heavily armed. So they are quite heavily reliant upon their weaponry in comparison to some Imperial escorts, which have much more specific jobs within a fleet area. For example, a Cobra class escort is going to be outgunned by even the lightest Chaos escort, simply because the Cobra is designed for long-range fighting with its torpedoes, as opposed to the Chaos escorts, which have to be able to take on anything of their weight class. As a result of this, Chaos forces tend to be pretty heavily weighted in terms of design towards cruisers, but that doesn't mean that they won't have lots of escorts. They will just have escorts of the same type, and you will often see Chaos escorts paired or even in trios very similar to their Imperial counterparts. You will just see less of them in an overall fleet capacity on occasion, just because of the production level of Chaos forces, and you will sometimes see them augmented with, like I mentioned, armed merchantmen or stolen Imperial escorts. We have talked about Chaos versatility or Chaos efficiency as a concept. Does this apply to Navy ships? We talked about it in the area of Titans and Knights. Does it apply to Navy ships? Yes, but it has a slightly different flavor. Now, versatility in terms of Chaos shipping means that they have certain classes of ship: escort, cruiser, grand cruiser, battleship, capital ship, etc. These are each designed to do something in Chaos service that is very specifically better than or designed to counter their opposite number in Loyalist service. So, for example, escorts in Loyalist service are designed to be scouts, to be patrolmen, to be long-ranging, and designed to be essentially light, mobile, and efficient. Chaos escorts are a lot closer to naval monitors that have equal speed to their Imperial counterparts. They are loaded down with weaponry in a way that their Imperial counterparts generally aren't. Now, there are some that match them in terms of firepower, but it is ubiquitous amongst the Chaos forces that their escorts are simply heavier on average because they are going to be outnumbered in some cases, and also they will be fighting against enemy forces that may have multiple armed vessels while they only have the escort. So, in this way, the Chaos escort will be designed to have a certain advantage over its opposite number. You will often see the same thing with their cruisers. The cruisers will be geared towards a certain type of combat or weapon system that they will either have more of or be better at utilizing because of their design than Loyalists. Who makes or supplies these ships for Chaos forces? Well, of course, there are 3 options here. The first and most obvious one is you don't necessarily have to get them supplied by anyone. You can keep Imperial or Chaos ships going for a very, very long time without a ton of maintenance as long as you treat them gently. Problem: Chaos has a hard time doing that because they're in constant combat most of the time, unless they want to take a breather, which can happen inside of the warp, which can also cause negative wear and tear to your ship. So the first one is the option of just not maintaining it. Obviously, Chaos ships are held to a much lower standard in terms of cleanliness, maintenance, training, etc. when compared to the Imperial Navy, in most cases. That's not always the case, but in most cases. But the second option is to resupply at a allied docking station. Now, what do I mean by allied docking station? There are areas within the Imperium of Man that are not so unfriendly towards Chaos forces as one might think. Now, the most primary of these are pirate havens. Pirate havens exist within various areas of the Imperial Galaxy, and they are mostly in areas that are difficult for Imperials to get to, aka the areas that Chaos forces use to move around within the Imperium. That means that pirates who use these asteroids, hive rocks, random space stations, resupply hubs, non-aligned planets that have been settled by scavengers, smugglers, pirates, refugees, etc., and they can stop down there and either strong arm or muscle the locals into helping them fix their ship, or they can actually barter for the same. If you happen to be in control of one of these areas, again, there's not thousands of these, but there are probably a couple hundred sprinkled around the galaxy of different levels and capabilities. Not to mention that some forces of chaos actually support these and keep them maintained. And these will have the supplies that ships need. They will have the fuel, they will have the slaves and or workers, they will have the ammunition required for ships, and more importantly, they will have food and water in abundance so that you can resupply your ship fairly easily. The last option are large, established forces within the Imperium, and usually within the warp as well. While some ships, genuine demon ships for example, can sustain themselves without any actual maintenance, most ships, like Titans and Knights, do actually need physical resupply in order to operate, no matter how chaos afflicted their occupants or even their very structure may be. The result of this is that forces like the Dark Mechanicum and, of course, various reformed legions who own Forge Worlds or other planets related to Forge Worlds like Mendrengard, they will also supply, not free, but paid servicing, resupply, and maintenance for these ships, not to mention being the main source of their production. Chaos Forge Worlds, and usually other Chaos planets, again, like Mendrengard within the Warp, are where most of these ships that are of genuine Chaos origin, where they come from. They are built within the Warp to the spec of real space, they are brought out into real space, and they are produced essentially cradle to grave on a single world. This is expensive and extensive and takes a very long time. It also requires a lot of extra help. You will notice that many of the vessels that we talk about were originally Imperial designs and have been copied in the warp by the forces of Chaos to create a new, uniquely Chaos vessel. Next one, don't Chaos forces capture Loyalist ships? Now, we talked a little bit about that with the why are there so few escorts, but yes, there are many examples of not only Loyalist ships betraying the Imperium and joining Chaos, but there are also plenty of ones that simply go missing, either from their shipyard, from high anchor, or they are captured in real space or in the warp on occasion. Not to mention that some of these just get lost in the warp and get alighted upon by various Chaos forces managing to capture them. So you will often see Loyalist ships in Chaos service because of this exact reason. They simply fall into Chaos hands, essentially. Why are Loyalist Marines included with Chaos? Do their escorts work like the Imperial escorts in terms of function? Well, the reason why Loyalist Marines are included within this video and not in their own video is really because of the sheer number of Chaos vessels in comparison to the sheer number of Marine vessels. The number of true Marine vessels can essentially be counted on one hand. There's really only 5 or 6 of them that are unique designs, and some of them have marks or variants, but they are not actual different ships. So there are so few of them, and they are used so infrequently or in such small numbers compared to the Imperial Navy, that they will fit in better here than they would in their own video. So, do their escorts work like Imperials? Well, kind of, to a degree. You can see entire chapters go to war with only a couple of cruisers and maybe a handful of escorts. A entire chapter could essentially be transported in only one capital ship, 2 cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 4 escorts. That could be an entire chapter of Marines. A whole 1,000 Marines can fit inside of that force. Theoretically, if you really wanted to clamp everyone up inside of their little rooms, you could put them all into one battle barge, but the battle barge will have to wait for another video, the next one up in this series. For the first and for how they work, let's just talk for a moment about how they function within the Imperial Navy, because of course, when they're not working alone, they will be getting most of the weight, quote unquote, of their force from the Imperial Navy. Now, strike cruisers are great and all, and they're very effective as cruisers. They're quite capable of doing all the things that other cruisers are capable of doing, and they have some good technology and options to boot, but they are in no way equal to genuine capital ships. Battle barges, again, are great, but not every chapter has one. And, matter of fact, some chapters will go their entire lives just using a strike cruiser as their main option. Now, there are other options. Theoretically, Loyalist Astartes could take on capital ships from the Navy as their own flagships, but this is pretty rare and not usually something that they want to do. If they are a smaller chapter that can't really boast more than a couple hundred Astartes, they're not going to be venerable enough to have a full-on battle barge and more than 2 or 3 strike cruisers. In reality, you could expect a minor chapter to really only field a couple of cruisers, a couple of light cruisers, and 6 or so escorts. While that is a quote-unquote mini battle fleet in some cases, it is definitely in need of assistance from the Imperial Navy, who will bring up not only their own massive cruisers, usually an equal number to the Astartes, but they will also bring the capital weight class ships in order to support whatever target is worthy of an entire chapter of the God Emperor Space Marines. There is one other scenario, and I call it the Marine Knife Ship theory. Now, the knife ship is kind of a mentality with the Marines. It's this idea that if my chapter is split up into many different splinters, the Marine battle fleet will consist of maybe 4 separate portions. If there is no battle barge involved, in which case there would be a 5th portion, the portions are separated as follows. Each portion will have either a light cruiser or a cruiser, and it will have 1 escort. Now, that 1 escort is kind of odd because we rarely see 1 escort and 1 cruiser, but you will see that it's actually pretty common with Chaos fleets that is the case. For every cruiser or battleship or above, there will be 1 escort, essentially to act as its scout and its ranger. The knife ship, the Marine knife ship, is this idea that, well, 100 or so Astartes, or 200 may be in the cruiser or light cruiser, 25 may be in an escort with them. And what can happen is while the Astartes on the main cruiser are going after the main target, say they're landing on a planet to go do planetary invasion, the knife ship will stay with the Navy. Why? Essentially, in case. The knife ship is an in-case ship. It can target secondary objectives. It can find other targets in orbit. It can defend against Chaos Astartes that try and take over the other vessels. It is essentially a backup, and what occasionally happens is that this small escort, if the battlefield is secure enough and if the need is dire enough, will go along with the Imperial Navy and deploy its 2.5 or so squads of Astartes to a special interest location. Let's say that we're invading a planet as loyalists. The Astartes, of course, will go down from the cruiser onto the planet, but we have neglected something. There is an orbital space station that is still threatening and endangering both the planet and the Navy. The knife ship will simply slide out of its line in the Imperial ranks, and it will go and attack it directly with Marines. This saves the rest of the Loyalists the trip back up into orbit to go and do it themselves. So let's get to our types and classes here. The first one is the Infidel Raider. It is, of course, an escort with weapon tier 1, a speed of 5 grav, pretty respectable for a ship its size, and with a very respectable 50 resilience. Its frontal armor is 14 and its side armor is 12, sporting a pretty significant ribbed armored hull up front, regular void layers, no flex mountings, and a side battery of a weapons battery. So you will often hear me talk about weapons battery when it comes to Chaos ships. A weapons battery is essentially an option. You can choose either macro cannons or lances. Now, this is not something that you can trade out interchangeably, but in the game system you can, but essentially it is what the ship comes packaged with, can be either macro cannons or lances. So it has the option there, and then it has a fixed battery of 2 torpedo tubes up above its nose or prow muzzle. It has a manpower of 6, giving it 6,000 crew, pretty significant for an escort, and an auspex accuracy of 24, which is pretty regular, if a little bit low for a full-on escort. The quote here is, "Monsk made me, I got stolen, then spawned 2 sister-class ships, the Infidel and the Falchion." And that is true. Monsk, the shipyard, did originally make the design for the Infidel, but it was discarded. Or rather, it was stolen by Chaos forces, and the Imperium trying to reverse engineer it, and Chaos trying to reverse engineer it, not only resulted in the Infidel being created, but also in the Falchion on the Imperial side. And the question is really, is this ship just that good? And I don't know. I think it's up to interpretation whether the Infidel itself is good as a design, or rather that the structure or the original design that made the Infidel was actually just an incredibly god-tier design that Monsk managed to mess up and get stolen from them. Either way, a pretty effective raider, and a good example of what I mean when I say that Chaos Escorts are relatively well-armed and well-armored compared to their Imperial counterparts. You know, mainly designed to outfire and outmaneuver those enemy ships. Outgun them, mostly. The Idolater Raider, I often refer to this one as a sniper rifle with an engine. It has a speed of 7 grav, giving it a blistering acceleration rate, almost on par with a lot of the faster Imperial ships like the Clipper. It has a resilience of 20, however, making it no more durable than the average Hunter class or even Cobra class vessel. It is a very light ship, much like a glass cannon, including its incredibly low armor. It has 8 void layers, a little bit more than the Infidel Raider because of its improved power supply, but you can see it is packed with firepower, armed to the teeth for a ship with only 4 manpower. I'm skinny, but I am packed with firepower. It has up front a flexible lance weapon. Full on lance here. It has a side battery, again, like the Infidel, and then it has another forward-facing fixed lance known as a las-burner. That is the tier 1 forward lance weapon. So this, you really get to see what the idea with the Idolater is. It's fast, it's well-armed, but a lot of its actual killing power is focused on the very front. It is essentially a sniper rifle with an engine. It is designed to absolutely sprint in a single direction, flip around very quickly, empty out 2 sets of lance weaponry, and then turn, fire a broadside, and keep moving. It's a very heavy raiding vessel, and it could be very, very effective at multiple roles, because it's not just heavily front-loaded, it also has weapons batteries on the side. But of course, due to its low durability and relatively bad armor, you're going to want to keep this one pretty far back from the battle line. The next one up is our first loyalist on the list, the Gladius frigate. Pretty nice frigate by all terms. It is an escort with tier weapon 1. It is a speed of 5, a resilience of 35, 12 and 12 armor, no frontal improvements here, 12 void layers, 2 flex mountings, one in the back and one in the front, and then a side battery of lances. So it is a laser side weapon, and it has no fixed batteries. With a manpower of 3 and an auspex accuracy of 22, It is really just an upgraded sword class, but it has some odd lore to it, in my opinion. It says that it's shielded like a cruiser and armed like a cruiser, but it is still decidedly an escort. Now, let's compare this one to one with the Infidel Raider, which of course is not fair because the Gladius has a different job than it. In terms of speed, they're both exactly the same, but in terms of resilience, the Infidel is far beefier, far thicker, and far tougher. It also has significantly more manpower, which plays into that resilience because, of course, that means more damage control crews. The armor on the front of the Infidel is superior, mostly because the Gladius has its launch bays, not for aircraft, by the way, or not for combat aircraft, but rather just for aircraft in general, at the front, not allowing it to have an armored prow. On terms of void layers, they are of course exactly the same, but the Gladius has two flex weapons. Now, flex weapons, again, so like we talked about, are basically 360-degree turreted weapons on the top of the ship. These could be lances, macro cannons, plasma, missiles, or even flak batteries that can help the ship get other options, and especially given that this ship's only option is lance batteries for its side weaponry, that means that it's going to struggle with shields. So you would probably want to have these be macro cannons, or at least one of them, to destroy enemy shields before you unleash your side-mounted lances to rip them apart. So you can kind of see how the Gladius is trying to be a lot of things. It has the lances of the sword, it has the statistics of the sword, but it is also adding in flex weapons and significant speed and void layers on top of the others. And its Auspex accuracy is just a little bit inferior to the Infidel Raider, and given its longer range with its side batteries, it's probably going to be pretty much fine. Moving on to what is essentially a fancy-ass Cobra. It is the Hunter class vessel. It is essentially the same as the Cobra, except with higher speed at 9, a resilience of 25, exactly the same, armor same, void layers same, and the only armament on the Hunter is 4 torpedo tubes at the front. Now, some of them can have a flex mounting, but mostly we're talking about something that is just a marine version or a mildly upgraded version, a fancy version of the Cobra class escort. These are again designed to simply lob torpedoes at a target from very far away and then run away at breakneck speed. So, very effective here, but let's move on to some more interesting ones in terms of escorts. The Apostate. The Apostate is one of my favorite escorts for Chaos because it shows some very interesting things that are in some ways related to the Infidel. It is considered a frigate, but it's very well armed. You can see that even though it has a slower speed at 4 grav, that's mostly because of the power draw for its weapons. It has 50 resilience, again built off of a similar architecture to the Infidel, with the same armor profile and the same void layers. It has no flexible weapon mounts, like many Chaos escorts, to be honest, but it does have a weapons battery side mount. Again, that could be lances or macro cannons, that's on the sides, but at the front it has something that's pretty unique amongst even Chaos vessels, and matter of fact, among most vessels, this is very unheard of. 2 forward las burners. So 2 very long range, very high damage weapons that are essentially designed to damage cruiser class vessels because they are much stronger than even broadside lances. So, large and in charge, don't try and run. That's the whole deal with the Apostate. The idea is essentially that it can keep up with most, even slightly quicker than average, escorts and merchantmen, and not only does it have weapons batteries to take down enemy shields, it then has 2 las burners to effectively give it even better firepower than the Infidel, or the Idolater, and yet it still has all this durability and resistance. So this is a pretty nasty little pocket tank killer in terms of an escort. It is very, very dangerous, even to cruiser class ships, because it has 2 forward facing high armor penetration weapons. Now, of course, against something like an escort by itself, it simply doesn't have the durability to go the distance, and because it can't use its fixed batteries and its weapons batteries at the same time, it is best to pair up apostates, or to have apostates go with iconoclasts or other vessels that focus more on taking down shields, so that it can stay in the back and effectively plink away at those vessels. But against merchantmen, it will absolutely destroy them, even if they manage to run away. Speaking of the Iconoclast Destroyer, now this is a very interesting one, and honestly, it's a little bit silly. It is a massively upgunned freighter. My guns are awesome for what I am. Now, why do I call it an upgunned freighter? Well, let's look at the stats. It has 7 grav speed. That's very, very fast. And you can actually see from the rear of the vessel, it is essentially a freighter's chassis, but you've doubled up on the number of engines, which has dramatically increased the speed, and you really haven't lowered the weight, or you really haven't raised the weight all that much. Because, of course, there's also no storage down here. Resilience of 25, again, relatively low, but higher than the Idolater. But what's more interesting here is the weaponry choice for these. It has one missile. It's always a missile at the front, or sometimes at the rear back, these kind of pylon areas. One missile battery as a flex weapon, and one macro cannon battery. So this is very standard armament for an escort. Missiles are usually pretty effective against lightly armored ships, but macro cannons are very effective against shields. So this effectively keeps up with and kind of compensates for some of the issues of other escorts. Now, with a manpower of 4 and an auspex accuracy of 26, you can kind of see what I'm getting at when I call this an upgunned freighter, or a militarized freighter. You can even see that if you were to fuse the frontal section of an Imperial freighter, you would get something similar to the Iconoclast in terms of the modifications. So what this essentially is, it is something that is very advantageous to pair with other escorts of Chaos classes in order to knock out enemy shields so that they can use their lance weaponry to greatest effect, and it is very fast in order to chase down those enemy vessels. You could theoretically modify a freighter into this, given that you had a shipyard and the weaponry to do so, essentially by closing the frontal section of the hull into a little bit more armor protection, removing all the stowages, doubling up on the engines, and then arming it. And that's really all that you have to do. Heck, you could even call some of these Tarrasque merchantmen, given all the odd protuberances and pustules that are on the rear of the vessel, kind of these long sections almost like smokestacks. The last one on our escort list, and I know it's come to an end quickly. There are not a lot of Chaos escorts, as I mentioned. The last one is the Nova Frigate. The Nova Frigate is a marine escort with a speed of 6, resilience of 45, better frontal armor, better void layers, and incredibly well armored. And in my opinion, it's trying so hard to become a strike cruiser that it hurts. It's trying so hard to be a strike cruiser. So, let's talk about the armament. It has its flex mounting up here at the front. Again, that could be any type of weapon that's able to shoot 360. It has a side battery. This, again, could be macros or lasers. It doesn't seem to discriminate. But it also has a frontal las burner, and you can see from its stats that it is a lot closer in firepower to or in firepower, armor, and resilience to something like an apostate, except it is much faster. It is designed to keep up with and overtake vessels like the apostate, or vessels like pirates or freighters, because it is designed to hunt them down and outgun them. So the Nova is really this kind of pirate hunter medium escort that you don't really see with the other two. The Gladius is very light, and it's relatively close to a standard escort sword, and the Hunter is very specialized with its torpedoes. The Nova is really the first craft that is close to the apostate and the infidel in terms of firepower, in terms of protection, in terms of durability. So, outside of that, you're not going to see a bunch of those all-rounder vessels within standard marine fleets. So, moving on to Chaos and Marine cruisers and light cruisers. What are marine cruisers and what do they do, or Chaos cruisers? Variety, specialties, and overwhelming firepower on a budget. Now, you will notice that I don't focus much on light cruisers here. Why is that? There aren't a lot of them. We'll get to that in a second. But cruisers in both of their services are designed to do a couple of things. Some of them are very specialized. Some of them are very specialized into one specific task. They do one thing really well. We knock out shields really well. We invade planets really well. And they kind of sacrifice some of their versatility in order to do so. But outside of those, which are a relatively small number and usually won't be in large numbers, they have a focus on having versatility against other Imperial ships and having overwhelming firepower without being too expensive. And you'll see in this that there's not a lot of frills. They add certain things on, but it's not massive changes, it's minor modifications to give them a one-up in a one-on-one battle with their Imperial counterparts. So you will often see that Chaos Cruisers will have flex weapons, where standard cruisers of the Imperium do not. They will have various types of extra weaponry where the Imperial cruisers simply don't. And of course, Chaos has very few light cruisers. Because of course, what's the point of a light cruiser? You have your escorts that are already going to be able to overcome Imperial escorts. Your cruisers need to overcome Imperial cruisers, so there's really no space for a light cruiser, except for one interesting exception that we'll get into. So, why few light cruisers? Does Chaos need light cruisers? What's the benefit of a light cruiser to Chaos? Again, why are there so few? Well, two reasons. One, the design for light cruisers doesn't really give much to Chaos. They're already kind of clapped out and heavily laden with a bunch of extra material and weaponry because they are a slightly larger than Escort class ship that has tier 2 weapons in it. So they're already kind of cramped, which is against the Chaos style of having efficient multi-purpose ships that are also better than the Imperial average. Does Chaos need light cruisers? Well, no, not really. They have a lot of cruisers. They have a lot of genuine cruisers, and they do not really need to split up their navy like the Imperials do. One Chaos cruiser will be able to subdue a lot more targets in a single run than a light Imperial cruiser. Mostly because the Chaos Cruiser is out for the loot. They're out to go steal things from other ships, and the Loyalist Light Cruiser is out here to kill things. Chaos is here to capture and reuse. Loyalists and or Imperials in general are here to destroy. So the light cruiser concept, the idea that you get a lighter vessel that is less expensive, but is pretty heavily overtooled and sacrifices some things for its firepower, doesn't appeal to them. And it doesn't really benefit them as much as it does the Imperium because, well, why would I sacrifice something when I already have a design that does all the things the light cruiser does well? And on top of that, it has better armor, better weight, better size, better displacement, more storage for me. Why would I make that sacrifice? Again, with one unique exception. The goal of the cruiser, as listed here, is to remain efficient, to carry the warband's warriors and fighters, and to be able to defeat a large number of escorts, and to stand equal footing or better than Imperial cruisers, and especially light cruisers. Chaos efficiency, however, is stretched to its maximum limit with these. Cruisers are difficult to maintain. They are much, much larger than escorts. They require far more supplies. They have way, way, way higher storage needs. And unlike escorts, which can be multi-purpose, like we talked about with armed merchantmen, cruisers are decidedly combat craft. They do not have the luxury of hauling around a bunch of their own supplies, which is why Chaos Forces will often have a train of 3 to 4 captured freighters that they use to supply their bigger vessels. But even if that's not the case, Chaos will often clap them in with more supply rooms. They will empty them out and prepare for more troops or fuel or ammunition to be stored within them. And of course, they will have escorts around to share the load of these cruisers' weight. Preparing mentally for both invasions, orbital wars, piracy, and raids requires all the ships to be able to do multiple things unless there are multiple escorts with them. So when you talk about those more specialized cruisers, the ones that are good at one specific thing, you're talking about ones that are going to have the luxury of either having other cruisers with them that aren't specialists or have more than 2 escorts. Now again, like I said before, with Chaos Escorts, you might have multiple of them, but it's rare that you will have more than 1 per every cruiser that you have in the fleet because, well, generally Chaos tends to show up with quite a few cruisers. 2 isn't unreasonable for even like a standard warband. So having more than 3 escorts is not really all that expected for a general warband. Now, for much larger ones, yes, you will expect somewhere around the range of 6 escorts, but for those 6 escorts, like you can see here, you might be looking at a cruiser, a second cruiser, a third cruiser, and 2 grand cruisers. So, for 2 capital ships and 3 cruiser class vessels, you only have 7 escorts. So you could quite easily be looking at a ratio of 1.25 escorts per cruiser, which means that the cruiser has to kind of prep itself in terms of design and mentality to do all these different jobs. It will be the one holding the buck for the invasion, for orbital bombardment. It will be holding the buck when it comes to carrying all the fighters. It will be holding the buck when it comes to be fighting enemy capital ships. It will have to be concerned with those things and worry about it in future. So they can't really keep that in their head unless they're specialists who can expect to have multiple escorts or other cruisers helping them out. Talking about Loyalists for a second. Loyalist cruisers, strike cruisers, and the Vanguard light cruisers. Now, these operate similar in my mind to mini warband tactics for chapters. A light cruiser or a space marine cruiser, which we'll talk about the strike cruiser in this as well, it's going to be one of the heaviest vessels the Marines have access to that is controlled by them. Now, of course, they do like to bring the Navy into things, and that means that they'll get access to plenty of cruisers, light cruisers, capital ships, battle cruisers, all different types of things, but if the Marines are going it alone, they have to rely on the strike cruiser for gosh darn everything that they're doing, and honestly, they end up operating like a miniature warband. They have a lot of the same tactics. They keep their escorts at low numbers so that they can go out and scout and do other things like raid, quote unquote, but also when they have light cruisers, they expect them to do a lot of different jobs, and they outfit them in that manner, which we will see with the Vanguard class. So let's get right into the stats here with the Emasculator. Pretty funny name, but we are now talking about cruisers with tier 2 weapons, in this case a speed of 3 grav, a resilience of 120, pretty regular, and an armor of 18 at the front and 14 at the sides. Now 18 frontal armor is pretty darn significant. The Emasculator is tough at the nose, but it is pretty average for a cruiser on the side. It has 16 void layers, and it has the armament of 1 macro battery and 1 lance battery. Stop me if you've heard this before, that's the same armament as the Luna class cruiser. However, we have an interesting situation here. The Emasculator has either 4 torpedoes, has 4 torpedoes and, not or, and a fixed lance weapon. So that means it essentially trades out 2 of its torpedo tubes for a lance. Given that it's so heavily frontally armored, that makes a lot of sense. With a manpower of 11, giving it around 10,000, giving around 10,100 crew, oh my goodness, I'm losing my mind. Yes, 11,000 crew. I'm losing my actual mind, excuse me. Are giving it around 11,000 crew and an all-specs accuracy of 20. You can see that this is kind of taking the design of the Luna. I'm trying to outstrip the Luna class so hard that I'm going to pop a blood vessel. Because, to be honest, that's what the Emasculator is. It is literally designed to go toe-to-toe with Luna class cruisers and have an option that they don't. Its side armament, exactly the same. Its armor, the same, except that the front is better armored. So what it really kind of relies on is that it will do more damage on the charge with its fixed lance than the Luna class will with its 6 torpedoes, which isn't unreasonable. The fixed lance does more damage on average than torpedoes, because torpedoes can be shot out of the air or avoided pretty easily. So it is relying on this idea that it will outdo its opponent in the Imperial line. And you can see again that kind of idea of Chaos cruisers are going to be reliant on being better than their Imperial counterparts, because they will usually be outnumbered by them, and they will have to take every single 1v1 to be a victory, or they will at least want to push for that. Speaking of things that are trying a little bit too hard, the Inferno. The Inferno class is similar to both the Luna and the Emasculator. So you can see I'm a slightly worse, cheaper Luna drawn from the Carnage class. The Carnage class is another thing that we will talk about later. It is another cruiser, but yeah, it is essentially a cheap Luna. Speed of 3, resilience 120, but the armor is back down to the Luna class's level at 1614 rather than 1814 of the Emasculator. Same void shields, and of course, the same armament, but lacking the frontal lance weapon of the Emasculator and having one less manpower. Essentially, the Inferno is the Emasculator built on the cheap. It is going to be inferior, again, genuinely inferior this time, with the 4 torpedoes as opposed to 6, to the Luna class cruiser. So why even have it? Why is it a design? Well, mostly because of expense. We have to remember that Chaos fleets want to have multiple cruisers, if not capital ships, so that they can dramatically overpower and outweight any Imperial response force. If I am a Chaos force and I am expecting to face something like 1 cruiser or a cruiser and a light cruiser and then 4 escorts, I want to bring 2 full-on cruisers and 2 escorts because my cruisers are expected to go one-on-one with their cruisers and win. So if I have 2, I will win. So even having the Inferno, even having it with its minor inferiority, it will still dumpster light cruisers and obliterate escorts without all that much difficulty. So you'd want to pair the Inferno, a cheap ship, with a more expensive or specialized ship that does one thing really well, so that it can support it with its variety of weapons, with its macro cannon battery, and side lance. The next one up is our obligatory loyalist, the Vanguard Light Cruiser. Very fancy boy here, I like it a lot. It has a speed of 6 grav, putting it twice as quick as the average Chaos Cruiser, but then again, it is a light cruiser, and it is 40 resilience less because it is much smaller. Its armor is an all-around 14, making it pretty durable, but only as durable as the Emasculator's sides. 14 void layers, only a little bit less than a true cruiser, no flex mountings, and a side battery of macro cannons, and a front fixed weapon of a single launch bay, this time for genuine combat aircraft, and 2 torpedo tubes, and has a manpower of 6, Auspex accuracy of 24. I am a strike cruiser on a diet. You won't like me, but I get the job done. And that is pretty true of the Vanguard overall. It is a light cruiser. It is really trying hard to be a strike cruiser. Like a lot of Imperial ships, it's trying to get the same versatility with the launch bay torpedo macro battery combo that the strike cruiser has, but it has some serious limitations to its health and to its voids and armor, with the advantage that it is incredibly fast. It is outpacing Chaos light cruisers, and it is outpacing quite a few of their escorts as well. But the Vanguard, of course, is one of those examples where it will be broken up with other fleets, and it will have Imperial support a majority of the time. But even if it didn't, it could still, with its launch bay and with its macro cannon battery, dumpster many different types of escorts. It is firing with tier 2 weapons, meaning that it can pretty easily batter down the defenses of enemy escorts, and then use its launch bay and its torpedoes to destroy them. So it has a lot of versatility, a lot of options, but of course it has the same limitations as any light cruiser naturally will. The next one up is a bit of a conundrum. It is the Hellbringer Light Cruiser, a very odd vessel. It has a speed of 5 grav, a resilience of 80, frontal armor of 14, but only a side armor of 12, 14 void layers, 2 flex weapons, a macro battery, and a launch bay, all in one little light cruiser. Can you believe it? So, 2 flexible weapons, giving it lots of options and variety, a macro cannon battery, giving it the ability to destroy enemy escorts, and a full-on launch bay. Not a fixed launch bay, but 2 full launch bays, one on either side for aircraft, with a manpower of 10 and an Auspex of 22. This is an odd duck. It's weirdly good at a lot of things. However, it apparently hasn't been remade in 9,000 years, according to the lore. Hmm. And yet every single Chaos Warband seems to use the Hellbringer, and there are different variants of the Hellbringer that exist. How does that make sense? Well, the lore doesn't really agree with logic or reality. If Chaos was able to make a bunch of different classes of ships, which they have, from either scratch, from random schematics, or from examples of the ships themselves, doubtless they could make the Hellbringer again, and yet the lore says they simply haven't. Here's what I theorize. The Hellbringer Mark I, the original, is the best version. It was the one that was equipped with all of what I have just described here. And those are the originals. Those are the ones that either are very difficult to reproduce and are simply being repaired, or they have been updated or upgraded, and it's not considered a full reproduction in terms of the lore. That or the lore is just outright lying, which can happen a lot with ship lore that doesn't get updated after, 50 years of game. So here's the interesting thing. The Hellbringer Mark II is just a slightly modified version, and it doesn't get a lot of screen time, but we do see the Hellbringer all the time. We see it in tons of warbands. It's the Chaos Light Cruiser, because it is the only Chaos Light Cruiser. There are no other Chaos Light Cruisers out there other than ones stolen from the Imperium. And it's a pretty useful design. We can see it has launch bays, it has macro cannons, it has flex weapons, so much variety, so much durability. Inferior to the Vanguard a little bit in its toughness, but it is fast. So, this is a planetary invasion ship. And that was actually its ostensive intentional design. It was designed for planetary invasion. It was designed to have the weapons needed to invade a planet, in addition to the aircraft needed to suppress enemy anti-aircraft and to launch invading troops. So with that specific role, and with the specialness that it may or may not have, the Hellbringer may not see a lot of open combat with enemy naval ships that are above escort class. Why is that? Well, one, it can chase down and kill escorts really, really well with its launch bays, macro cannons, and flex weapons, but in addition to that, if it is that precious, and even if it isn't, you will want to keep your specialized planetary invasion ship very well protected. I don't expect an emasculator or an inferno to perform on the planetary invasion front like the Hellbringer, thus when it comes to fighting in the void, I will keep the Hellbringer safe at the expense of maybe an inferno or an emasculator. Speaking of large cruisers, the Murder class. I love the names of Chaos Cruisers so much. They're hilarious, and they get even better when we get up to the capital ships. So, the Murder class. This is a pretty average cruiser overall. Speed of 3, resilience 120, armor front 16, armor side 14, 16 void layers. Oh boy, here's where we get to the weird shit. And you can see from the quote, after they threw me out of the Imperial battle fleets, I took the best plasma weapons ever and decided to get all spiky, baby. And that's pretty much what the Murder is. It is 3 flexible plasma weapons on the upper part of the ship, on the upper deck. Now, these flex plasma weapons are high armor piercing, and they're pretty effective at taking down even other cruisers directly from the front because of their high armor penetration. But in addition to that, it has side batteries of macro cannons, 6 torpedo tubes, and a lance at the front. It is bristling with firepower. It is incredibly well armed and relatively well armored, even in comparison to Imperial cruisers. The Murder is really designed as a one-man show. It has everything. It has the range with the torpedoes and the lance. It has the pummeling power and the anti-shield power with double macro cannons. And it has the specialized high armor piercing capability weapons, flexible weapons in this case, with its plasma cannons. So the Murder is definitely on the more expensive side and the much harder to maintain side, but it does the job of multiple cruisers in one ship. It has all of these different specialized armaments in one package. And you can see again how that chaos efficiency thing, it is eggs in one basket, but if I'm going to have my ships be constantly outnumbered and constantly outgunned and be harassed all the time, I want something big, nasty, and with enough firepower to put things down quick, fast, and in a hurry. And the Murder class is a great example of that. So there's your probably most expensive cruiser in terms of chaos ships. Speaking of expensive, and also speaking of very useful, Devastation class. Devastation class is another cruiser basically built off of the same structure as the Murder, except its armament is different. It has the same 6 torpedo tubes of the Murder, but it doesn't have its lance weapons. Why is that? Because it has lances on the side. The Devastation is essentially, you'll never get in range, and I frickin' dare you to try. It has a lance battery on the side, and a hangar bay, and 6 torpedo tubes. So this is very much one of those ships that is specialized into supporting the battle line. It has all long-ranged weapons. It has torpedoes for when you're very, very far away. It has launch bays to do lots of different jobs like fleet support, on top of also attacking enemy ships from a very long distance. And then, of course, it has its lance battery. The Devastation would like nothing more than to turn broadside to the enemy and calmly launch its torpedoes, shoot with its lances, and launch its aircraft far enough away that no enemy macro cannon could ever hit it. And that is kind of the deal with these. It serves that more specialist role that the Murder class kind of overcompensates to, do multiple roles. The Devastation picks a specific one. By the way, that is not to say that the Murder is without some downsides. It has some defects in its design, like some other vessels do, but you can go into that yourself. I'm just talking about the ships themselves in this, not any surrounding issues. The Slaughter class is the next up for cruisers. It is a weapon tier 2. It has a higher speed than most of the other cruisers at 4, normal resilience, normal armor, normal voids. However, it's got some interesting mountings here. The first one is 2 flexible lances, those long-range 360-degree firing guns. But what do we have here? 2 side batteries. Now, notice it doesn't say macro cannons or its lances. It says either or with side batteries. Now, that could mean that this ship is loaded up with macro cannons. Usually, when it says side batteries, they are both the same exact thing, so you wouldn't accidentally turn a Slaughter into a emasculator, essentially, or an Inferno. But what would happen here is you would pick either macros, so that you could knock down the shields and then use the lances for damage, or you would pick pure lances so that you can go along with something like a Devastation class and provide it a ton more firepower to help deal with the fact that it is also launching aircraft. In addition to that, it has the requisite 6 torpedo tubes of any good cruiser, and the quote for here is, "I'm fast, I'm actually pretty flexible." And it is. It has the option of switching out its weapons. It has these nice, effective lance weapons. Even if it chooses a shorter range weapon, it can still use the lances to snipe at enemy escorts. So, the Slaughter class is another all-arounder, but it isn't trying as hard as the Murder class because it isn't armed as heavily. And it also isn't nearly as overclapped out in terms of its power system. The Slaughter is relatively normal, and it's relatively average in terms of capability. Now let's talk about one that is significantly less average, the Strike Cruiser. The Strike Cruiser has it all. It has 5 speed, making it faster than even the Slaughter class. It has 100 resilience, making it only a little bit less tough than the Slaughter or Murder, but not making it really to that level of light cruiser just yet. But it has more armor than any of the others. It has 16/16, giving it an all-round protection that the other cruisers do not have. It has more void layers than the other cruisers as well. You can see its increased power giving it more protection. It has a flex mounting, again, in the front. It has a side battery. Usually this is macro cannons, but it can also be lances. And it has a fixed battery of 1 fixed forward lance and a forward hangar deck. Again, similar to a lot of Space Marine vehicles, they prefer a forward fixed hangar bay. And you will see this with other vessels as well, but it's very obvious in the Strike Cruiser. And, unfortunately, it does sound a little underwhelming. Behold, literally what most chapters use as their capital ships, quote-unquote, and their main spacebound headquarters in most campaigns. It's a pretty normal cruiser, all things considered. It is just that. It is a pretty middle-of-the-road average cruiser. It does lots of things. It has a flex weapon. It has a side battery. It has a lance. It has a hanger. So all of these can be changed so that it can do different jobs, but none of these is an overwhelming firepower advantage. It doesn't even have two banks of weapons like the Slaughter, Murder, and Devastation classes do. So it is missing out on a little bit of firepower and a little bit of durability in exchange for higher armor, higher speed, better voids, better Auspex accuracy, and of course, the variety. Flex, battery, fixed, forward, all of these different options essentially give it much more flexibility when it's dealing with enemy threats. It can go to a lot of different places and utilize a lot of different strategies that these more clapped out, restricted, range limited cruisers cannot. And of course, it is relatively cheap compared to something like a murder class. And of course, Chaos Forces do use them as well. So let's start off with the Carnage, because this is the Demon ship is going to be a slightly different thing, because that can be in multiple different classes. The Carnage is another one on a similar level to the Murder. It was kicked out of the Navy, and it is absolutely pissed about it, and it's about to make it everybody's problem. It has some durability issues, as you can tell, with its lower resilience, but its armor and its voids are pretty much normal. What is unique about the Carnage is it has a flex weapon, weapon batteries, and 6 torpedo tubes. Again, similar to the Slaughter class, it is kicking around with an independent role. It has many options, but you will also notice a dramatic increase in the amount of manpower here. Remember, manpower also represents how much storage you have aboard. 16 manpower gives you 6 or 7 more manpower than the average Chaos Cruiser, meaning that the Carnage can carry enough supplies for itself and maybe even another escort aboard. Which means that even though it has kind of flexible, nondescript, or non-specific weaponry created for a non-specialized task, it does have a pretty useful aspect in that it has that flexibility, but it also has the storage to accommodate itself and to prepare itself and other ships for long voyages and to hold cargo and things like that. So let's talk about the Demon ship. The Demon ship is technically a cruiser, but it can also be a type of capital ship, light cruiser, or escort, depending upon the book series, essentially. It has a resilience of 110, similar to the Carnage class. It has a frontal armor of 16, side of 14, void layers of 16, no flex mountings, but it has 2 weapons batteries and 1 fixed weapon. This fixed weapon is usually a warp cannon. Now, there's a rule in the game called dedication, but we don't have to get into that so far. The idea with the Demon ship is it is literally a ship that has spent too much time in the warp or been intentionally possessed with demons. Oh boy, I shouldn't have spent so much time in the warp. The idea is essentially that this vessel has lost its original shape and structure. There are so many creatures and so many warp parasites inhabiting it, literally living in symbiosis with the crew, the vessel itself, the metalwork, the structure, that it has started to change how the ship works. For example, that fixed weapon at the front, that isn't a lance or a torpedo, it's literally a warp cannon. It is a high-powered lightning gun, essentially, that shoots out and can absolutely scorch escorts out of existence with a single shot. They're incredibly powerful, similar to the Imperial Nova Cannon, but they perform a little bit differently. These show up during the Gaunt's Ghost series. It's actually where we get some of the best examples of them. There is a battleship that is a demon ship, a cruiser that is a demon ship, and an escort all serving together in the same fleet, and they manage to obliterate a light cruiser and several escorts and endanger several more before the cruiser and the escort are knocked out, leaving the battleship to try and flee the scene. Now, sometimes these do have human crew, and you'll notice with the manpower of 16, that crew can be pretty significant, but that doesn't mean that they are normal or even technically alive anymore. They could just be forming the structure of the ship itself, as you can see with all this fleshy structure. That could be the crew. However, in whatever case, that doesn't mean that the ships are completely without direction or that the demons are necessarily in charge of them. Technically, you could say that the Conqueror is a demon ship at this point, considering how demons literally wander freely through the halls, and its ship mistress is demon corrupted, or warp corrupted at the very least, and has fused with her vessel, though that is not unreasonable for chaos ships that have been around for a while. Again, There could be demon ships that are intentionally created and then guided around by humans or Astartes, but they are dangerous to operate, and quite often you can simply point them in a direction and they will do quite a bit of damage. Think of them like Chaos Spawn, but for the Navy. So, that is the end to our Chaos and Marine Navy series. It is also a welcome appreciation to the 400 subscribers that we have. What an incredible achievement for this channel. You guys have no idea how happy I was today to see that we got up so close to that probably in the next couple days we're going to break it. We are so close to 500. Once I hit 500, I have multiple specials for you guys. I have artwork. I have series planned. I will have forum and discussion and all that stuff. Everyone is welcome to the Discord. Everybody is welcome to all these things. There will be streams coming up. There will be more videos coming up. Of course, I intend to finish this Navy series. Hopefully, I intend for the Navy series to end right when we hit 500, so I can prep that big series of the 500 thank you video and all that appreciation for you guys that I know I owe you, and I have been planning on it. I've got the design out. But I really want to hear what you guys think, what you guys want to do for that, how you think about it, other than what I've done so far. And of course, as usual, to help us hit that goal, please send us around. Please get us to your friends, recommend us, share us where you want, send it out on Reddit, whatever you want to do, feel free to share us out because we're a growing community. I'm so excited to have more of you in here. And those of you who have been here, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful good night.